Stop everything you're doing right now because what I'm about to reveal will absolutely blow your mind. Peter Mandelson, former UK ambassador to the United States, former European Trade Commissioner, former Secretary of State for Business, arrested this morning at his London home for leaking classified government information to Jeffrey Epstein, the man who once called a convicted sex offender his best pal, the man who shared secrets that shaped global financial markets, the man who betrayed his country for a decade while sitting at the highest tables of power. This is not speculation. This is not a theory. This is Metropolitan Police confirmation of what investigators have suspected for years. The Epstein network reached into the heart of the British government, and today one of its most prominent nodes has been exposed. The arrest came at 7:30 this morning, Camden, North London. Counter-terrorism officers moved on Mandelson's residence with a warrant obtained under the Official Secrets Act. They were not gentle. They were not diplomatic. They kicked in his door while he was still in bed. They seized computers, they seized phones, they seized documents, and they found what they expected, evidence that Mandelson, while serving as business secretary in 2009 and 2010, systematically passed sensitive government information to Jeffrey Epstein. Information about tax policy, information about bank regulation, information about the 2010 European Union bailout that ultimately totaled 500 billion euros, information worth billions to those who received it early, information that Epstein used, information that made him richer, information that made him more powerful, and information that compromised the integrity of British economic policy at its most vulnerable moment. The relationship between Mandelson and Epstein was not secret. It was not hidden. It was celebrated. In 2003, Mandelson contributed to a birthday book for Epstein. He wrote this: "To my best pal, Jeffrey, who never ceases to surprise his friends with his limitless energy and capacity to make things happen." Best pal, those were his words, not mine, not leaked, published, in a book that celebrated a man who would later be convicted of procuring a child for prostitution, who would later be arrested for sex trafficking, who would later die in federal custody awaiting trial for crimes against dozens of young women. Mandelson called this man his best pal, and he meant it, because best pals share secrets, best pals help each other, best pals do favors that others cannot explain. The investigation into Mandelson began in September 2025. That is when he was fired as UK ambassador to the United States. The firing was sudden, it was unexpected, it was explained as a routine reshuffle, but it was not routine. Prime Minister Keir Starmer had been briefed by security services. They had evidence, they had communications, they had proof that Mandelson's relationship with Epstein went far beyond social acquaintance, that it was operational, that it was criminal, that it had continued for years after Epstein's conviction, for years after Epstein's death, for years while Mandelson held positions of extraordinary trust and extraordinary power. The specific charges are misconduct in public office. This is a common law offense in the United Kingdom. It carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. It is reserved for the most serious abuses of public trust, for officials who use their position for private gain, for officials who betray their oath, for officials who serve foreign interests over national interests. The Crown Prosecution Service does not bring these charges lightly. They have reviewed the evidence. They have interviewed witnesses. They have traced financial flows, and they are confident enough to arrest a man who was, until 6 months ago, the United Kingdom's most senior diplomatic representative to its most important ally. The timeline matters here. In 2009 and 2010, Mandelson was business secretary under Gordon Brown. This was during the global financial crisis, the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. Banks were failing, markets were crashing, governments were scrambling to prevent total systemic collapse. And in the middle of this chaos, Mandelson was sharing confidential information with Jeffrey Epstein, information about which banks would be saved, information about which regulations would be imposed, information about the massive European bailout that would ultimately stabilize the Eurozone. Epstein received this information before markets did, before other investors did, before the public knew. The financial advantage this provided is incalculable. The betrayal of public trust is absolute. But why? Why would a man at the pinnacle of British politics risk everything for a convicted sex offender? The answer may lie in what Epstein offered in return. Not money. Mandelson had money. Not connections. Mandelson had connections. Something else. Something that Mandelson valued more than wealth or status. Access to power. Access to secrets. Access to a network that operated above national laws, above democratic accountability, above conventional morality. Epstein's circle included presidents, princes, prime ministers, billionaires, scientists, the intellectual and financial elite of global society. Mandelson wanted to be in that circle. He wanted to be accepted by that circle. He wanted to be best pals with that circle. And he paid for that acceptance with the secrets of his own country. The arrest has sent shockwaves through Westminster. Keir Starmer has called an emergency cabinet meeting. The opposition is demanding a full parliamentary inquiry. The United States has requested a confidential briefing on what information may have been compromised during Mandelson's tenure as ambassador. The European Commission is reviewing all decisions made during Mandelson's time as Trade Commissioner. The scope of potential damage is staggering. Every policy Mandelson touched, every negotiation he conducted, every secret he had access to. All of it is now suspect. All of it must be reviewed. All of it may have been tainted by his relationship with Epstein's network. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Metropolitan Police have confirmed that the investigation continues. They are examining Mandelson's communications with other Epstein associates. They are tracing his financial records for the past 2 decades. They are interviewing witnesses who attended Epstein's gatherings, who saw Mandelson there, who heard him speak, who watched him operate. The network that Epstein built did not die with him. It evolved, it dispersed, it found new facilitators, new collectors, new best pals. Mandelson was one of them. There will be others. The implications for British democracy are profound. If a man like Mandelson could be compromised, if he could serve 2 masters for a decade without detection, if he could rise to the highest diplomatic post while maintaining active criminal relationships, then who else? How many other officials have been photographed with Epstein? How many have visited his properties? How many have called him friend? The questions that Parliament must now ask are not comfortable. They implicate both major parties. They span multiple governments. They reach into the present administration and the past. They suggest that Epstein's corruption was not an aberration. It was a system, a method, a standard operating procedure for a certain class of global elite. Mandelson will appear in court tomorrow, Westminster Magistrates' Court. He will be asked to enter a plea. He will be remanded in custody or released on bail. The trial will follow. Months of evidence, testimony, revelation. The British public will learn exactly what their former ambassador shared, exactly what Epstein did with that information, exactly who else was involved. The process will be painful, it will be embarrassing, it will damage Britain's reputation. But it is necessary, because without accountability there is no democracy. Without transparency, there is no trust. Without justice, there is no rule of law. This case also raises questions about the future. Epstein died in 2019, officially by suicide. Many believe otherwise, but his network persists, his money persists, his methods persist. Blackmail, the compromise, the systematic collection of leverage over powerful people. Someone is running that network now. Someone is receiving the information that Mandelson and others provide. Someone is using that information to shape policy, to influence elections, to control governments. The arrest of Mandelson is a victory, but it is a small victory in a larger war. A war for the integrity of democratic institutions, a war against shadow networks that operate beyond national borders, beyond legal constraints, beyond moral limits. The Metropolitan Police have promised full transparency. Within the constraints of national security, they have established a dedicated hotline for witnesses. They have requested that anyone with information about Mandelson's activities come forward. They have indicated that more arrests are possible, that more charges are likely, that this investigation will continue for months, perhaps years. The message is clear. No one is above the law, not ambassadors, not lords, not best pals of dead pedophiles. The reckoning has begun, and it will not stop until every compromised official is exposed, every secret is revealed, every betrayal is punished. Peter Mandelson once wrote that Jeffrey Epstein never ceased to surprise his friends with his limitless energy and capacity to make things happen. Today, Mandelson is the one surprising his friends, surprising them with the depth of his betrayal, surprising them with the extent of his criminality, surprising them with the consequences of calling a monster his best pal. The energy he devoted to that friendship has destroyed him. The capacity he demonstrated for making things happen has been turned against him. And the surprises for Mandelson are just beginning, in court, in prison, in history's judgment. Let us examine the methodology of this betrayal more closely. How does a senior government minister communicate with a criminal network for years without detection? The answer lies in the architecture of elite social networks. Mandelson and Epstein moved in the same circles. They attended the same parties. They vacationed at the same exclusive locations. They shared mutual friends who were themselves powerful and influential. This social camouflage made their communications invisible. They were not secret meetings in darkened rooms. They were conversations at dinner parties, exchanges at charity galas, whispers during weekend retreats. The information flowed naturally, disguised as social interaction, hidden in plain sight among the chatter of the wealthy and well-connected. The specific mechanisms of information transfer reveal sophisticated tradecraft, encrypted messaging applications, disposable email accounts, intermediaries who carried messages without knowing their contents, dead drops in locations that appeared innocent, a book left at a club, a message in the margins of a newspaper, a comment made in passing that contained coded meaning. These techniques, developed by intelligence agencies and adopted by criminal networks, allowed Mandelson to operate as a mole within his own government. He had the perfect cover. He was the establishment. He was the system. He was above suspicion because he was the source of suspicion for others. The financial dimension of this case requires careful examination. Mandelson was wealthy by any standard. He did not need money from Epstein, but wealth and capital are different currencies. Epstein offered access to a global investment network that operated on information asymmetry, knowing which banks would fail before they failed, knowing which regulations would change before they changed, knowing which governments would bail out which industries before the announcements were made. This information allowed Epstein and his associates to position their investments for maximum return. It allowed them to avoid losses that others suffered. It allowed them to profit from the misery of millions during the financial crisis. Mandelson provided the roadmap. Epstein provided the vehicle. Together, they extracted billions from the collapse of 2008. The human cost of this betrayal extends beyond financial markets. When governments make decisions based on compromised information, real people suffer. Pensions are lost, homes are foreclosed, businesses fail, jobs disappear, communities collapse. The European bailout that Mandelson previewed for Epstein was designed to save the Eurozone. But it was also designed by people who knew exactly how the markets would react, who had positioned themselves to benefit from every twist and turn of the crisis, who treated the economic devastation of millions as an investment opportunity. This is not an abstract policy failure. This is a specific criminal conspiracy. This is theft on a global scale. This is treason against the people Mandelson was sworn to serve. The institutional response to this scandal will determine whether British democracy can survive such penetration. Keir Starmer faces an existential test. His government must investigate thoroughly without destroying public confidence in the government itself. They must prosecute vigorously without appearing to conduct a political witch hunt. They must reform security procedures without creating a surveillance state. This balance is delicate, it is difficult, it is necessary. Because if the response is inadequate, if powerful men escape accountability, if the system protects its own, then the message is clear. The Epstein method works. Corruption pays. Betrayal is profitable. And others will follow the path that Mandelson blazed. The international dimensions of this case are equally significant. Mandelson was not simply a British official. He was a European commissioner. He was the architect of trade agreements that shaped the global economy. He negotiated with China, with India, with the United States, with Russia. Every negotiation he conducted is now suspect. Every agreement he signed may have been influenced by Epstein's network. Every concession he made may have been payment for services rendered. The European Union must conduct its own investigation. The World Trade Organization must review his decisions. The governments of every nation that negotiated with Mandelson must assess what information was compromised. This is not a British scandal. This is a global crisis of governance. The media's role in this story also demands scrutiny. For years, journalists knew about Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. They knew about the birthday book inscription. They knew about the social connections. They knew about the unusual financial arrangements. But they did not investigate. They did not expose. They did not demand accountability. Why? Because Mandelson was powerful. Because he was well-connected. Because he could sue for libel. Because he could deny access. Because the establishment protects its own. This failure of journalism allowed the conspiracy to continue. It allowed Mandelson to rise to ever higher positions. It allowed him to betray his country for a decade without exposure. The media must now examine its own complicity, its own cowardice, its own failure to serve the public interest. The psychological profile of Peter Mandelson offers insights into how such betrayal becomes possible. He was ambitious from his earliest years. He sought power with single-minded determination. He cultivated connections with ruthless efficiency. He eliminated rivals with cold calculation. But ambition requires validation. It requires recognition. It requires acceptance by those who matter. Epstein offered this acceptance. He offered entry into a world that Mandelson could not access through politics alone, a world of unlimited wealth, unlimited luxury, unlimited depravity. For a man who had devoted his life to climbing social hierarchies, the temptation was irresistible. The price was irrelevant. The consequences were unimaginable until they arrived at his door this morning. The legal proceedings that follow will test the independence of British courts. Mandelson has resources. He has connections. He has the best lawyers that money can buy. He will argue that his communications with Epstein were innocent, that the information he shared was not classified, that his actions were within the discretion of his office, that the prosecution is politically motivated, that he is the victim of a witch hunt. These arguments will be tested against evidence, against documents, against testimony, against the simple fact that he called a convicted sex offender his best pal and then shared government secrets with him. The law is clear, the facts are clear, the only question is whether justice will be equally clear. The cultural impact of this case will extend far beyond politics. It will shape public understanding of power, of elite networks, of the relationship between wealth and government, of the reality that the people who rule are not necessarily the people who govern. That behind the visible institutions of democracy lie invisible networks of influence. That these networks are not conspiracies in the traditional sense. They are social circles, they are shared interests, they are mutual dependencies, they are systems of reciprocal obligation that bind the powerful together against the powerless. Mandelson's arrest exposes this system, but exposing it is not enough. Dismantling it requires sustained effort, political will, public pressure, and a refusal to accept that this is simply how the world works. The historical significance of this moment cannot be overstated. Britain has faced political scandals before. Profumo in the 1960s, Iraq dossier in the early 2000s, phone hacking in the 2010s. But this is different. This is not about sex. This is not about lies. This is not about media misconduct. This is about systematic betrayal of national security for personal gain. This is about a government minister serving a criminal network. This is about the penetration of the British state by forces that operate outside any democratic control. If this can happen, anything can happen. The foundations of trust that make government possible have been shaken. Whether they can be rebuilt remains to be seen. The final question is what happens next. Mandelson will be tried. He will likely be convicted. He will serve prison time. But will the network he served be dismantled? Will the other compromised officials be identified? Will the systems that allowed such penetration be reformed? Or will this be treated as an isolated case, a bad apple, a one-off failure, a tragedy without systemic implications? If that is the response, then nothing has been learned, nothing has changed. And the next Mandelson is already rising through the ranks, already making connections, already sharing secrets, already calling his criminal handlers his best pals. The cycle will continue, unless we choose to stop it. Peter Mandelson once wrote that Jeffrey Epstein never ceased to surprise his friends with his limitless energy and capacity to make things happen. Today, Mandelson is the one surprising his friends, surprising them with the depth of his betrayal, surprising them with the extent of his criminality, surprising them with the consequences of calling a monster his best pal. The energy he devoted to that friendship has destroyed him. The capacity he demonstrated for making things happen has been turned against him. And the surprises for Mandelson are just beginning. In court, in prison, in history's judgment. This is Capital Pulse. We will continue to follow this story as it develops. We will continue to ask the questions that power does not want asked. We will continue to report the truth, however disturbing it may be.